In this video, we are going to learn about LeChatelier's principle and how we might apply it both in our own lives and also, of course, in chemistry. Here is the person who came up with LeChatelier's principle, Henri-Louis LeChatelier, obviously a French chemist, and this principle was developed in 1888. And it says, if a system at equilibrium is subjected to a stress, the system will adjust to relieve the stress and reestablish equilibrium. Okay, so we have to have a system, and it could be a chemical equilibrium, it could be the solution equilibrium, it could be lots of other kinds of equilibrium, and when something is done to it that messes up the equilibrium, then that system will adjust to get rid of that thing that messed it up and then try to reestablish an equilibrium. Not exactly the same equilibrium, it'll be in a different position, but it'll be equilibrium again. All right, so there are several ways we can stress a chemical system, so let's look at that, then let's look at some other examples, and we'll come back to the chemical systems. So we can stress a chemical system one of three ways, essentially. We can change the concentration of something that participates in the reaction. We could increase the reactants, we could increase the products, we could decrease the reactants or the products. We could also change the pressure or volume if there are gases in the system. If there are no gases, changing the pressure or volume has no effect. By the way, remember Boyle's law that says that pressure and volume are inversely related, so when we increase the pressure, we generally would decrease the volume, we could anyway, and vice versa. And finally, we can change the temperature of a system. That's one of the most dramatic ways to change an equilibrium, is to change the temperature. All right, so let's just round this up in one statement, which we're going to apply in a variety of different ways, which is the concentration of a participant increases, the system will shift to decrease it. So if something goes up, the system is going to do something to make it go back down. And then the reverse of that's true as well. If you decrease something, the system's going to adjust to try to increase it and get it back where it was before. All right, let's have a look at what might be a real-life application of this, and then we'll, in the next video, look at an application from chemistry. This woman, her name was Jennifer Wilbanks. She was scheduled to get married in April of 2005, so it's been a few years ago now. And you may or may not remember hearing about this situation. She had, and her intended husband had invited 600 people. She had 14 bridesmaids. And on the Tuesday before she was scheduled to get married, she went out jogging like she often did, and she disappeared. And a few days later, she called from, this was in either Georgia or Florida, and a few days later she called from Arizona with a wild story about having been kidnapped and taken to Arizona, and eventually they figured out that because of some inconsistencies in her story that she had not in fact been kidnapped, that she had just run away. Right, so basically she had a huge stress applied to her system, to her life, this wedding coming up, this huge wedding coming up, and she chose to relieve the stress by running away. Okay, so we can ask ourselves, how else could she have relieved the stress? So you might want to take a second, pause, and just think about that. And so we can probably think of a lot of ways of relieving the stress, but we can also see that this LeChatelier's principle kind of applies in our everyday lives as well. When we have stresses, we do things to relieve the stress. Even perhaps we could do something to actually take care of what the problem is, or we could do other things. We could escape it by working out or playing a game or whatever we might want to do. So let's consider LeChatelier's principle in our own lives. What are some of the things that stress us, and how would we go about relieving them, as I just talked about? Okay, in the next video, we're going to look at a chemical situation and how equilibrium applies, or I'm sorry, how LeChatelier's principle applies to this equilibrium.